When Laura Orsini got pregnant unexpectedly, her Catholic upbringing kicked in to inform her actions. But over time, her adoption grew to be more than just giving up a child to appease the church. Her story came with twists and turns no one could have predicted. Find out what happened and what she learned this time on Adoption Uncovered. Just give me a brief overview of your story and your connection to adoption.
I am Laura Orsini. I live right now in Chandler, Arizona. I got pregnant when I was 27 and placed my son through. At the time, I was told, I don't have any reason to disbelieve it. I just never researched it. The oldest continuously operating adoption agency in the country, which is Spence Chapin in New York City. So I placed him with his other family who live in New Jersey.
Tell me about when the first things when you found out, oh my gosh, I'm pregnant, and weren't expecting it. What were the thoughts going through your head at that time?
So I was 12, going to Catholic school, and it was the only time this ever happened in my entire 8 years at this school. But they had an assembly, and they brought in prospective or already adoptive parents to talk to us about if you ever get pregnant. Hey, don't have sex because you shouldn't have sex at all. But if you do and you get pregnant, make sure you give it to a nice couple like us. That was the message. So when I got pregnant, I think that message was really deeply implanted. I was 27. It was 15 years later. But my first thought, that was back to your question. My first thought was, I'm not keeping this baby. I'm going to place him.
Laura felt strongly about the desire to place her child in a family she felt comfortable with. That intense desire helped give her the tenacity to advocate for herself. She acknowledges that not all birth mothers are in a position to speak up for their needs or their child's needs, which leaves her with gratitude that her son was placed with the family that she was able to choose. You felt pretty good about your process and how that came about and where you were able to place your child, right?
Generally speaking, I think we had a very, very good experience. I mean, there was one really major hiccup, but it was minor relative to all the things that went very well. The complication, I went through Spence, and at the time, Spence Chapin used to allow the prospective birth mothers to look at 3 to 4 profiles. I don't know how much your audience knows about what a profile is, but back when I was placing, and I have no idea what's changed or what is still the same, but the prospective birth mother and my son's father was also involved grudgingly, but he was there for the first 6 or 7 meetings he went. And so in this case, birth parents, we were there. And so they give you a profile, and it's 3 parts. It's a letter, dear birth mother or dear birth parents. It's a photo album, and it's a dossier of just what this prospective family wanting to adopt a child is about. So they put it together. I think they probably have some guidelines on how they do it, but the family puts this profile together. So they gave me 3 or 4, and I said, what happens if I don't like the first 3 or 4? And they're like, well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Most women find a family within the first 3 or 4. And I remember thinking, I'm not sure that's going to work for me. This is the most important decision I'll ever make in my life, and you're giving me 3 or 4 choices. So I didn't like the first 3 or 4, and I didn't like the next 3 or 4. And the agency started to get really frustrated with me, and they told me they didn't think I was serious about placing. So Tony and I had been together for 5 years at that time. I was 27. I had a job. I had health care, and I wasn't ready to be a mom, and he wasn't ready to marry me. And so that was going to be my condition to be a mother, was I wanted to be married. And he said he wasn't ready. So I was very serious about placing, but I just hadn't found the family I wanted. So it was a very difficult negotiation with the agency to get them to keep on giving me profiles. And it wasn't until, he referred to them at one point as the baby sellers, and that grated on me then, but I really get it now. And he said, until I started treating the baby as a commodity and said, look, I'll go up the street to the other agency if you can't give me the family I need. And then they took me seriously. But I mean, I really had to push back on that. So I became involved with a new thing that got started as a part of, a birth mom who had surrendered through them, placed through them. And that was the Birth Mother Advisory Board. So we started giving our feedback and making suggestions about things, that the way they did things for the birth moms, the birth families. And one of those was they should see all the profiles. every prospective birth mother who comes in, you don't get to decide, let them decide. So, because they were limiting it, because they were automatically limiting, because I didn't want a single parent. I didn't necessarily want somebody who was radically different ethnically from me. I wasn't looking for a gay couple, but now, at least at the time when I left, I don't know what's changed. I have not kept in touch with them. Every prospective birth mother saw every prospective adoptive family. They at least saw like a mini, like one sheet so that they could say, I would like to see that profile. So that changed, but that was probably one of the biggest hurdles in my adoption experience, was just the process of getting to the adoptive family.
Maintaining access to information about her son as he grew up was important to Laura. She did her best to negotiate for ongoing updates about her son, but it didn't entirely go her way.
So it was written into our adoption paperwork that we would have contact until Eric was 10, at which point they would invite him to decide whether or not he wanted to continue the contact. That was all moot by the time he was 10. It didn't even matter that was in the paperwork, but the getting to signing that into the paperwork was very challenging. So the meeting where we had this discussion, my social worker wasn't able to be there for some reason, and she should have not had the meeting until she could be there. I should have said, no, I won't have the meeting until she could be there. But nevertheless, we went forward with it. So it was Kathy and Bruce, their social worker, and Tony and I were in this meeting. And Bruce kept pushing back. He was like, okay, well, no pictures after he's 2. And I'm like, no, that's not going to work for me. And so that's when we got to this place of 10. We settled on it. But and then what they were going to name him, his name is Eric. His name is Eric Thomas Christian. And Christian was the name I gave him. So they agreed to put that into his name. So he has three first names that spell etc. So etc. So anyhow, but it was that conversation was challenging, and so I went home and felt terrible. And Tony didn't do much to back me up. He was there. He was a presence, but he didn't say anything. And so Kathy called me the next day and she said, I feel like I pulled the rug out from underneath you yesterday. And she apologized. And that was the thing that solidified her with me, was that she noticed, because I thought, a little like I thought it'd be today, I thought I was stoic, and I didn't know that I cried. And this was all over the phone. They weren't even in the room with us. They were, on a speakerphone. They weren't even there in the room. And she still knew that I was really upset. And she cared enough to reach out and say, hey, are you okay?
A combination of instinct and factual information enabled Laura to steer clear of some adoptive families that didn't seem like a good fit for her or her child.
I have heard horror stories. I know things have gone badly. I know birth mothers have lied. I know adoptive parents have promised things that they couldn't wind up living up to because they were living in fear. I mean, I think that's what it comes down to, is they were living in fear. But I have a lot of empathy, but I did not go through any. Those were the hurdles for me.
Right. But I expect it's kind of when you're looking at these profiles, even when you choose one, even when you're like, well, this is as close as I'm going to get, they're going to be humans with flaws that you may not see in the profile, right? I mean, it sounds like you had to deal with some of those.
Yeah, we did have those too. I mean, Kathy and Bruce are with they were the 12th profile I saw. But I do talk specifically about 2 others, and one of them, they seemed interesting in that he's a child psychologist and she was a part-time Montessori teacher, and so at least they had like kid energy. They spent time around kids, and when I met them, she was just a cold fish. She was just so like I can talk to. I've had probably 5 occasions in my entire life that I can remember where I couldn't have a conversation with someone. I am a good conversationalist and I can draw people out. It doesn't matter who they are, because I care and I'm interested. I couldn't talk to this woman for any reason. And she was just so cold. And the other thing was, I did not tell my son about my pregnancy until he was a year old. So I did not tell my parents about my son about my pregnancy until he was a year old. And so my folks didn't know, because I was in New Jersey and they were in Arizona, and I just didn't go home for Christmas, and they never knew. And so when people would say, how did your parents respond? And I say, I haven't told them. Well, you're going to tell them, right? At the time, I thought, no, I don't know if I ever will. And Kathy was the only one who said, hey, you knew your folks, you know them, and if you don't want to tell them, you must have a reason for that. And she was the only one who did. All the other birth mothers or adoptive moms, prospective adoptive moms I spoke with, were really agitated about that. And so this woman, between being cold, that was another thing, was you have to tell them. And so she went away. And then we got really close the time after that. And that this was a couple who I really liked them. And so my son has blonde hair and blue eyes, and he's about a foot taller than I am because he got all of his birth father's physical traits. He has my personality, which I think he got the right things. The distribution was perfect for him. So, but at the time, I didn't know I'd have a blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid. So this family who we were looking at, the woman resembled my mom, and so I thought like there was just a sense of connection. I really liked her. I liked them. And then so we had our first phone call, and then they tell me we're not going to be available by phone for 2 weeks, not by phone or to meet for 2 weeks. And I thought that was weird because I thought you get this close to a family, you'll come back from the moon to meet the mother of your baby, right? The possible mother of your baby. And they were real evasive and they wouldn't say what was going on. And so I went to my social worker and I said something weird. And so she went to their social worker, and it turns out that they hadn't had full disclosure on their form. He was having elective heart surgery. It was a valve issue that was not a life or death thing. It was an elective, but he hadn't disclosed this on his health forms. And so my social worker said, do you want to continue with the conversation? And I said, I will if I can get some clarity from them, because this seemed kind of sneaky and I would just like them to, why were they evasive, and perhaps apologize. And we had our next phone call, and she said to me, I swear to God, I'll never forget this till I die. We don't owe you anything.
Oh my gosh.
So
no thanks.
I didn't hang up on her. I got through the rest of the call, but that was done at that point.
Oh.
Both of those families, what happened with the first family, I found out later they withdrew because nobody chose them. I wasn't the only one who felt they were cold. No one chose them. And then this family, they had a near miss. They had a baby that was theirs, and they were ready to sign the papers, and the mom took off and left without even saying goodbye from the hospital. So they were still so crushed from that they were bringing a lot of woundedness to the next experience. So they withdrew their name for a little while. I'm sure they wound up adopting. They were good people. They just handled our situation wrong because my son wasn't supposed to be with them. He was supposed to be with Kathy and Bruce. So it does all work out. But that was those two other, they were, smaller blips. But yeah, when you're looking at, people are human and you are looking for perfection, and neither one of us is going to find perfection, but you want to get as close as you can.
Keeping contact with her son after he turned 10 was not a given. By a fairly miraculous series of events, that connection was able to return to Laura's life.
Now, I know you were really fortunate to then continue this relationship and connect with your son later. Can you tell me how that came about?
Sure. So I haven't written about this on the letters to my son blog, but yeah, we have what are known in adoption as synchronicities, just coincidences. And some people have one or two. Like I heard a story, a friend of mine who was a birth mom, the reason she chose the family she chose was because they both went snowshoeing in upstate New York. And it was enough of that feels familiar to me. Ours are so many that we can't count. And they're really weird things. Like Eric's aunt, who has since passed away, and I were next door neighbors at one point. It was not like we didn't know each other, but we lived in the houses literally right next door to each other at one point. His godmother lived several blocks away from us, and his family used to come in and vacation in the Phoenix area. They vacationed at a dude ranch that's about 80 miles from Phoenix. So they would fly into Phoenix like routinely before we ever met them. And so they're just coincidence after coincidence after coincidence. When we got married and Eric and his mom and dad came to our wedding, my husband's grandmother, also since passed away, and Bruce, Eric's dad, looked at each other. They knew each other because they had worked together in the same bank 30 years previously. So even my husband is drawn into this. I mean, there are so many circumstances like this. So the story of how our adoption became open, I was working at Lehman Brothers and quit because I was frustrated. I did wind up going back later, but at the time I quit, and I was temping in New York City. So I'm temping in New York City in an office for one guy. And he was the crankiest, nastiest, just most ornery person you've ever met. And I heard he's gone to jail since then. But I mean, just a horrible, obnoxious person. And I decided, that's it, I've had enough, I quit. And I decided, well, wait, before I quit, I want him to know my story, because the adoption was really new at that point. I think maybe Eric was a year and a half old. And so I was still in the emotional response to it and everything else. And so I took in the photographs, because our agreement was that we would get pictures regularly, and she sent pictures really all the time. I mean, Kathy was phenomenal. She even sent me a lock of his hair so I could see what color his hair was. I mean, she was just his first tooth that fell out. I mean, she was amazing. So, so I took the pictures for him to see, because I just wanted to share. Here's what I'm going through. I don't know what made me do it. I don't know why I thought it would impact him, but that was my reason for doing it. He knew Eric's father. Eric's father was his personal banker. And so he was, and I did ask at that point, I said, what is their last name? And so he told me. So it just became open because of that. So I told Tony, I had found out, Tony said, we don't owe them anything, meaning we don't owe Eric's family anything. And I did not feel that way. I felt like we owed it to them to let them know that we knew who they were now, because that wasn't in the agreement. We agreed it was semi-open. They knew who I was. I did not know who they were. So we arranged a phone call. And Bruce got really angry then. He told me I had no right to share the pictures. And I'm like, well, you gave the pictures to me, so they're mine. So yeah, I did have a right to share them. But because he was the one that was recognized, and he was the one who kind of wound up blowing it open. So little by little after that. And I remember Eric was maybe 10, and he was with his mom at work one day. He sent me an email from his mom's email. And so it just slowly kind of continued. And then when we got married, I invited them to come, and they did. So.
While activism has not intentionally been a major focus for Laura, one of the events she has organized has had a lasting effect.
So while I was still in New York, one of the things, the birth mother support group that I was part of. Now, somebody recently told me that it was my idea, and I would believe that, but I don't remember that to be the case. But so Birth Mother's Day is the Saturday before Mother's Day. So it is not on a particular day. Mother's Day is always the second Sunday, but Birth Mother's Day could be the first Saturday or the second Saturday, depending on when Mother's Day falls, but it's the Saturday before Mother's Day. So I found that out. Somehow I knew that. And I thought, well, we should have a Birth Mother's Day ceremony of some sort. So we did. We had the very first one. And people came and read poems, and, it was just the birth moms. The second year, we invited the other people, like if you wanted your adoptive parents to be there or whatever, it expanded just a little bit. And this year in 2022, they had the 25th anniversary of it. So that's how long it's been going. So that thing's been going every year, ever since then. And I got to be there via Zoom this time. They invited me there for the 25th anniversary. And I wrote a poem, which I will be happy to send to you, called The Birth Mother You Know. And basically, it's anybody could be a birth mom, because fat, short, skinny, tall, educated, uneducated. There's probably a birth mother in your life who is a birth mom. You just don't know it. That's the gist of the poem. So anyway, where was I going? So we had this commemoration, and when I got here, one of the first things I did was reach out to all the adoption agencies in the Phoenix area and say, hey, do you have birth mothers who would be interested in a birth mother event for Birth Mother's Day? And it was crickets. I mean, really, nobody thought it was a good idea. They didn't know me. I don't really know why, but one gal who worked for Catholic Charities, she got involved, and she and I became good friends ever since then. But and she brought 4 or 5 birth mothers to our first event. We had it at a coffee shop, and we did have one a few years ago, 5 or 6, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. We did a virtual one. So I kind of have touched my feet into it here and there. I know a lot of birth mothers because of my involvement with adoption, either through Spence or just they know me, and I don't hesitate to tell my story. So I'm not in the closet or hidden about it at all. So, the blog, whatever, I have met a lot of birth moms.
Laura has had the opportunity to speak to different parts of the adoption triad. When talking to groups, she encourages adoptive families to keep in mind that the adoptive child is more than just their son or daughter. They have a bigger story to consider. It is also important to keep in mind that adoption is not an easy fix for hardships like infertility.
One of the things that I did wind up doing is I did a lot of public speaking about adoption to prospective adoptive parents, to people who were brand new adoptive parents, and to social workers. And one of the things I said is, look, they're not going to tell you this, but here, listen up and get this right now. The baby's never going to be your blood child. And the sooner you come to terms with that, the easier it's going to be for everybody. And nobody's going to say that because they don't want to hurt your feelings. But I'm not trying to hurt your feelings. I just want you to understand that piece. If you get that piece, then the expectations go away, the frustrations, I don't know your circumstances and I am not in any way judging them. But for me, it mattered a great deal. Two things: that the family already have a child, because I did not want my son to be the guinea pig. I wanted them to have had experience parenting. And I understand that's very rare for birth moms. They always want their kid to be first, because that way they're special. I wanted them to know what they were doing. And the second thing was, they had a biological child who died at a week. She had a heart defect. So they decided, let's get pregnant again right now as soon as we can. And they did. And so they had a second child who lived, who is Eric's older sister. And then they waited 10 years before they decided to adopt. So they did not go through the infertility experience. And for me, that made a big difference, because it felt, even though I know it was not intentional, and this is part of the people are human piece, that there was judgment, that there was resentment, that I could do something that you can't do, and we're needed to have a transaction because of that, and there's frustration there. And I don't know how to clear the air on that, but that feels like a conversation that at least needs to get addressed from one side or the other in terms of the social workers, so.
Right. So like view it more like birth mom is making this choice, not that she's deficient and therefore I have to compensate for that.
Right. And exactly the same way on the reverse. It's not like you were deficient because you couldn't bear a biological child.
Right.
You're making a choice. And so, yeah, that piece of it. There's a gal who is a social worker who has written extensively. She said she's the only person I've ever heard say this, and I think it's true. And I think that this is what I was writing about, is that infertility, like adoption, has to be viewed as an extension of infertility, because you try IVF, you try the things that you're trying to get pregnant, to have a baby, you're disappointed, and you expect adoption to come and solve it instantly. But if adoption doesn't solve it immediately because the birth mother changes her mind or other circumstances come up, it's an extension of the process of making a family. And so we society, the adoption agencies, I think even the counselors, have them as these two distinctly separate pieces, but they're not. And she was the only person I've ever heard say it's just an extension of the process. So I think in that transparency, in the making things better, that's another piece of the conversation. But I think it's not just go lecture the adoptive family. Here, view it this way. It's explain to the birth family what the adoptive family is going through, because that part wasn't explained to me. However, if that wasn't explained to me on the first 11 profiles, here's why they might be having grief. Here's why they might be withholding from you. Here's where there might be a difficulty in conversation. They didn't say any of that. And so you're kind of left to piece it together. And like I said, I was smart. I was older. I was a reader. I had all kinds of capacity to get information, but you're in the middle of an unplanned pregnancy. Your hormones are going crazy. Your partner's not holding up the way you would like him to. And you feel like you're navigating it all by yourself, even though you have a really good social worker, behind you. So yeah, as much information as you can get. The other part is, I don't know how much information birth moms are able to process in the middle of all that either.
Right.
So you go through an attorney adoption, and I do know that the law requires the attorney to say counseling is available to you if you want it. But if they don't say it in the moment you hear it, they only have to say it once. They don't have to keep offering you the option for counseling. So if you don't know, again, what you don't know that in the middle of this, I really, really need counseling, you could be walking blind, even more blindly than you ought to be. That's why I really think the agency idea is a better one for all sides. Of course, I'm biased because that was my experience, but it just feels like everybody is better represented when you go through an agency adoption.
If a person they're having this baby, they're overwhelmed, these adoptive families are coming in, like, this is not your baby, it's part of me that I'm giving you. And like, so it's just not, even though they're adopting a baby, it's still adoption. And you're going to still have the trauma for the baby and all this other stuff. It seems like you're kind of saying like that's a perspective that sometimes adoptive families that are adopting babies come in and they don't think about that. This is still adoption. This is not like you have solved your infertility problem.
Right. There's going to be stuff. There's still going to be stuff. And so, Kathy she did a thing that I think is both an amazing and fantastic thing and oh my God, did you really do that thing? Which was she always tried to see all the possible ways that a situation could turn out. But that was looking at it from like the bleakest to the most positive, because she said, her words were, I wanted to be ready for any possibility. I don't think that you can do that. You can't make it your way through life if you do that with everything. But anything that had to do with Eric, she was really looking for all the ways that it might go, ready for it to be fantastic and ready for like sheer disaster to happen. And because of her foresight in that, I think that alleviated a lot of the challenges. So I just was so blessed. I mean, I do not lie. I know that ours was a storybook, experience relative to what other moms go through.
Laura is a big proponent of transparency every step of the way along the adoption journey. She wants to see all members of the adoption triad treated with respect, and she's using her blog, Eric's Other Mother, and being open about her story to encourage others to have a realistic and fair view of all sides of adoption. If you want to learn more about Laura's blog and other projects, check out my website at adoptionuncovered.com, and thank you.